The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of London as Elon Musk stepped out of his black Tesla Model S, plowed onto the bustling streets near Buckingham Palace. His security team followed at a respectful distance while tourists and locals alike began to notice the familiar figure in his signature black t-shirt and dark jeans. The tech billionaire had arrived in London 3 days earlier for what his publicists called a routine business trip, but what he privately viewed as a much-needed break from the relentless pace of running multiple companies. Musk stretched, his arms above his head and breathed in the crisp London air. The city always energized him in ways that Silicon Valley never could. There was something about the mix of ancient history and modern innovation that appealed to his restless mind. He had spent the previous day in back-to-back meetings with British government officials about Tesla's expansion plans and potential Starlink partnerships. The discussions had gone well, but left him feeling mentally drained and craving something more spontaneous. His phone buzzed, constantly with notifications from Twitter, emails from his various companies, and text messages from friends and colleagues around the world. Musk glanced at the screen and saw 43 unread messages from his team at SpaceX alone. He made a conscious decision to ignore them for now. Today was supposed to be different. Today was about being a tourist in one of the world's most historic cities. The idea to visit Buckingham Palace had come to him during breakfast at his hotel. He was scrolling through his Twitter feed when he saw a trending hashtag about the changing of the guard ceremony. The comments were filled with tourists sharing photos and videos of the famous red uniformed soldiers standing at attention. Something about their serious expressions and unwavering dedication struck him as both admirable and slightly amusing. As he walked through St. James's Park toward the palace, Musk found himself thinking again about the nature of duty and service. His own companies demanded absolute commitment from their employees. He expected his engineers to work 16-hour days and his executives to be available around the clock. Yet there was something different about military service that he had never fully experienced himself. These guards weren't driven by stock options or the promise of changing the world through technology. They served for reasons that seemed almost quite in his fast-paced digital universe. The crowds grew thicker as he approached the palace gates. Families with children pressed against the iron railings, their cameras and phones capturing every angle of the magnificent building. Tour guides spoke in multiple languages, explaining the history and significance of the monarchy to eager listeners. Street performers entertained the waiting crowds, while vendors sold postcards and miniature Union Jack flags. Musk noticed how the tourists behaved around the guards. Most maintained a respectful distance, content to photograph them from afar. A few braver souls attempted to get closer, hoping to capture the perfect selfie, but they were quickly moved along by police officers who patrolled the area. The guards themselves seemed immune to the attention, standing perfectly still despite the chaos swirling around them. He pulled out his phone and opened his camera app. The device felt familiar in his hands after years of documenting his life and businesses on social media. His Twitter account had become a powerful tool for communicating directly with the public, bypassing traditional media channels that often misrepresented his words or intentions. Every photo and video he shared was seen by millions of people within minutes. As he moved closer to the gates, Musk began to frame potential shots in his mind. The palace itself was undeniably impressive, but it was the human element that really caught his attention. The guards represented something authentic in a world increasingly dominated by artificial intelligence and digital interactions. They were real people doing real jobs with real consequences for their actions. One guard in particular drew his focus. The young man appeared to be in his early 20s with sharp features and an impressively straight posture. His red tunic was perfectly pressed, and his bearskin hat sat at precisely the correct angle. Everything about his appearance suggested years of training and discipline. Yet his face remained completely expressionless, as if he existed in a different reality from the tourists and photographers surrounding him. Musk studied the guard more carefully. There was something almost robotic about his stillness. But unlike the robots being developed at his companies, this was a human being who had chosen to suppress his natural reactions and emotions in service of a greater purpose. The billionaire found himself genuinely curious about what kind of person would voluntarily submit to such rigid control. The morning light was perfect for photography, and Musk knew his followers would appreciate an interesting behind-the-scenes glimpse of his London adventure. His most successful posts often featured unexpected moments from his travels, particularly when they involved interactions with ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The guard represented exactly the kind of content that generated millions of views and thousands of comments. He moved closer to the railings, positioning himself for the best possible angle. The guard was less than 10 feet away now, close enough that Musk could see the individual threads in his uniform and the careful way his white gloves gripped his rifle. The young man's breathing was so controlled that his chest barely moved, and his eyes remained fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd. Other tourists began to notice Musk's presence and started taking photos of him as well. Some whispered excitedly to their companions, clearly recognizing the famous entrepreneur. A few held up their own phones, hoping to capture whatever was about to happen. The atmosphere grew more charged as people sensed that something interesting was brewing. Musk raised his phone and activated the camera. Through the screen, he could see the guard perfectly framed against the backdrop of the palace. The composition was ideal, with the ornate architecture providing a majestic setting for the solitary figure. But something about the guard's serious expression bothered him. The photo would be technically perfect, but somehow lacking in human connection. In his business dealings, Musk had learned that the most memorable moments often came from unexpected interactions and spontaneous decisions. His most viral tweets frequently featured humor or personality rather than corporate announcements. The guard's stoic demeanor presented an opportunity to create something more engaging than just another tourist photo. The thought crossed his mind that a simple smile would transform the entire image. Instead of capturing another standard photograph of an expressionless guard, he could create something warmer and more relatable. His followers would appreciate seeing the human side of these legendary figures, and the guard himself might even enjoy the brief moment of connection with someone who genuinely appreciated his service. Musk lowered his phone for a moment and looked directly at the guard. The young man's dedication was impressive, but surely a small smile wouldn't compromise his professional duties. After all, customer service was important in every industry, and the tourism industry was certainly important to the British economy. A friendly guard would create better memories for visitors and potentially encourage more people to return to London. The decision formed in his mind with characteristic speed and confidence. He would simply ask the guard to smile for the photo. It was a reasonable request that would benefit everyone involved. Musk stepped closer to the ornate iron railings that separated him from the palace grounds. The metal felt cool under his hands as he gripped the bars and leaned forward slightly. The guard was now only a few feet away, close enough that Musk could see the fine details of his uniform and the determined set of his jaw. The young soldier's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, looking through the crowd as if it did not exist at all. The billionaire raised his phone again and held it at the perfect angle to capture both the guard and the magnificent palace behind him. Through the camera screen, everything looked exactly as he had imagined. The lighting was perfect, the composition was professional, and the setting was undeniably impressive. Yet something still felt missing from the shot. The guard's face showed no emotion, no personality, no hint of the human being beneath the uniform. Musk had built his career on understanding what people wanted to see and giving it to them in unexpected ways. His social media presence was built on authenticity and humor, showing himself as approachable despite his enormous wealth and influence. His followers expected content that felt genuine rather than polished or corporate. A standard tourist photo would disappoint them and waste this perfect opportunity. The crowd around him continued to grow as word spread that a famous person was taking photos at the palace. Tourists began positioning themselves to get pictures of Musk as well as the guards. Children pointed excitedly while their parents whispered explanations about who he was and why he was important. The attention felt familiar and comfortable to Musk, who had long ago learned to use public interest to his advantage. He looked at the guard again and felt a moment of genuine admiration for the young man's discipline. Standing perfectly still for hours while crowds of strangers stared and photographed, you required a special kind of mental strength. Musk had experienced intense public scrutiny throughout his career, but he had always been free to respond, to defend himself, or to walk away when things became uncomfortable. These guards had no such options. The idea of asking for a smile seemed even more reasonable when viewed from this perspective. The guard was already performing for the public in a sense, standing as a living symbol of British tradition and military excellence. A small smile would simply make that performance more engaging and memorable for everyone involved. It would show that beneath the formal exterior was a real person who could connect with visitors from around the world. Musk cleared his throat softly and prepared to speak. He had given countless interviews and presentations over the years, always confident in his ability to communicate effectively with any audience. Whether he was explaining rocket science to investors or joking with late-night talk show hosts, he knew how to adapt his approach to get the response he wanted. A simple request to a young soldier should present no particular challenge. The morning air carried the sounds of London traffic and tourist chatter, but Musk focused entirely on the guard standing before him. He wanted his voice to sound friendly and respectful rather than demanding or entitled. The last thing he intended was to create any kind of confrontation or uncomfortable situation. This was meant to be a light-hearted interaction that would benefit everyone involved. Other tourists had noticed his intense focus on the particular guard and began gathering closer to see what would happen. Some held up their own phones, sensing that they might witness something worth recording. The anticipation in the air was almost tangible as people waited to see how the famous entrepreneur would interact with the stoic soldier. Musk raised his voice, just enough to be heard clearly over the ambient noise of the crowd. His tone was casual and friendly, the same voice he used when chatting with employees at his companies or guests at social events. He smiled broadly as he spoke, hoping to convey warmth and good intentions through his expression and body language. The words came out naturally and confidently. He addressed the guard as he would any other person, without considering that military protocol might require different forms of interaction. In his world, direct communication was valued and hierarchy was often informal, despite the enormous responsibilities involved. He expected the same casual approach to work in this situation. His request was simple and straightforward. He wanted the guard to smile for a photograph that would be shared with millions of people around the world. The exposure could be good for British tourism and would certainly make for more engaging content than another serious-faced military photo. Musk genuinely believed he was offering the guard a chance to be part of something positive and fun. The guard's reaction was immediate but subtle. His posture remained exactly the same. His eyes continued staring straight ahead, and his facial expression showed no change whatsoever. For several seconds, it seemed as though he had not heard the request at all. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next in this unexpected encounter between modern celebrity culture and ancient military tradition. Musk waited patiently for a response, his phone still raised and ready to capture the perfect shot. He had learned over the years that sometimes people needed a moment to process unexpected requests, especially when they were nervous about being photographed or unsure about proper protocol. He was prepared to be encouraging and reassuring if the guard seemed hesitant or uncomfortable. The silence stretched longer than expected, creating an almost theatrical tension in the air around the palace gates. Other tourists began whispering among themselves, speculating about what was happening and whether the guard would break his professional composure to respond to the famous visitor. Some seemed excited by the possibility of witnessing a rare moment of human interaction between such different worlds. Musk began to wonder if perhaps the guard had not heard him clearly over the noise of the crowd. London traffic could be quite loud, and the young man was trained to ignore distractions while on duty. It seemed possible that a polite request might simply get lost in the general chaos of tourist activity around the palace. He considered repeating his request in a louder voice but decided to wait a bit longer first. The guard was clearly a professional who took his duties seriously, and rushing him would not be respectful or productive. Musk had learned through years of managing complex projects that patience often yielded better results than pressure, especially when dealing with people who had their own standards and procedures to follow. The moment stretched on, filled with potential and uncertainty. The crowd continued to watch expectantly while the guard maintained his perfect military bearing. Musk kept his phone ready, confident that eventually the human connection he was seeking would break through the formal barriers of military protocol. He had no way of knowing that he was about to receive a lesson in the difference between commanding respect and simply expecting it. The stage was set for a confrontation between two very different worldviews, though only one of the participants fully understood what was about to unfold. The guard's response came with the precision and authority of someone who had been trained to handle exactly these kinds of situations. His voice cut through the morning air with crystal clarity, each word delivered with the kind of confidence that comes from years of military discipline and unwavering commitment to duty. The young soldier did not turn his head or shift his gaze, but his words carried such weight that everyone within earshot immediately understood the gravity of the moment. The crowd of tourists who had been chattering excitedly just moments before fell into complete silence. Phones that had been recording video continued to capture every second of the unfolding drama, but their owners stood frozen in place, hardly daring to breathe as they witnessed this unexpected clash between celebrity culture and military tradition. The morning light seemed to grow brighter, casting sharp shadows that emphasized the stark differences between the two men facing each other across the palace railings. Musk felt his confident smile falter for the first time in recent memory. The guard's words hit him like a physical blow, not because they were harsh or insulting, but because they were delivered with such absolute certainty and professional authority. This was not the response he had expected or prepared for. In his world of technology and innovation, most obstacles could be overcome through persistence, creativity, or simply throwing more resources at the problem. This situation seemed entirely different. The billionaire's phone remained raised in his hand, but his finger was no longer poised over the camera button. For perhaps the first time in years, he found himself genuinely unsure of how to proceed. The guard's rejection had been polite but absolutely final, delivered in a tone that suggested no amount of fame or fortune would change the outcome of this interaction. It was a humbling experience for someone accustomed to getting his way through sheer force of personality and influence. Other tourists began to murmur quietly among themselves, some expressing disappointment that the confrontation had not escalated into something more dramatic, while others seemed genuinely impressed by the guard's unwavering professionalism. A few elderly British visitors nodded approvingly, clearly pleased to see their military traditions being upheld in the face of modern celebrity entitlement. The international visitors seemed more confused, unsure whether to be entertained or concerned by what they were witnessing. Musk lowered his phone slowly, his mind racing as he tried to process what had just happened. The guard's response had revealed several things that made him deeply uncomfortable. First, his request had been interpreted not as friendly interaction, but as an attempt to turn a serious professional into entertainment. Second, his celebrity status had been acknowledged, but dismissed as irrelevant to the situation. Third, he had been firmly but politely told that his desires were simply not important in this context. The young soldier continued to stand at perfect attention, his breathing steady and controlled, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd. He showed no signs of satisfaction or smugness at having put the famous entrepreneur in his place. This was clearly not personal for him, but simply a matter of maintaining the standards and dignity of his position. His response had been automatic and immediate, suggesting that he had dealt with similar situations many times before. The silence stretched uncomfortably, as Musk struggled to find an appropriate response. In business meetings, he was known for his quick wit and ability to recover from setbacks with humor or bold new strategies. But this situation seemed to require a different kind of response, one that acknowledged the legitimate authority of someone who operated under completely different rules and values than his own world of entrepreneurship and innovation. Several members of the security team moved closer, sensing the tension and preparing to intervene if necessary. They were accustomed to managing difficult situations involving their high-profile client, but this particular scenario was outside their normal experience. The guard represented legitimate authority that could not be bypassed or negotiated with. In the usual ways, any attempt to escalate the situation would likely result in serious legal and diplomatic consequences. The crowd of onlookers continued to grow as word spread through the tourist area that something interesting was happening. At the palace gates, people pushed forward to get better views, their phones and cameras creating a wall of recording devices pointed at both Musk and the impassive guard. The entire scene was being documented from dozens of angles by strangers who would undoubtedly share their footage on social media within minutes. Musk realized that his next words would be crucial, not just for this immediate situation, but for his public image and reputation. The wrong response could make him appear petulant or entitled, while the right response might actually enhance his standing by showing grace under pressure. He had built his career partly on his ability to handle public scrutiny and turn potentially negative situations into positive publicity opportunities. The guard's professional demeanor began to have an unexpected effect on the billionaire's perspective. Rather than feeling angry or frustrated by the rejection, Musk found himself developing a grudging respect for the young man's unwavering commitment to his duties. This was clearly someone who took his responsibilities seriously and would not be swayed by external pressures or temptations, no matter how significant they might seem to others. A cool London breeze swept through the area, rustling the leaves of nearby trees and carrying with it the mixed scents of exhaust fumes and fresh flowers from the palace gardens. The weather seemed to match the mood of the moment, with shifting clouds overhead creating alternating patterns of sunlight and shadow across the scene. The natural beauty of the setting provided a stark contrast to the human drama unfolding at the palace gates. Children in the crowd began to lose interest and tugged at their parents' sleeves, eager to continue their sightseeing adventure. But the adults remained transfixed by the standoff between two very different representatives of their respective worlds. Some began taking photos of Musk himself, recognizing that his reaction to the situation might be more interesting than whatever response he eventually received from the guard. The moment had clearly reached a turning point where Musk needed to either escalate his demands or accept the rejection with dignity. His years of experience in high-stakes negotiations had taught him to recognize when he was in a losing position and when continued pressure would only make things worse. This appeared to be one of those situations where retreat was the wisest course of action. The guard's words continued to echo in his mind as he considered his options. The phrase about not being there for entertainment or social media content struck particularly deep, because it highlighted the fundamental difference between their two approaches to public service. The guard served his country and crown without regard for personal recognition or social media followers, while Musk's entire public persona was built on constant engagement with his audience through digital platforms. As the silence stretched longer, it became clear that the guard would not break his professional composure or elaborate on his initial response. He had said what needed to be said and would now wait for the situation to resolve itself naturally. The ball was entirely in Musk's court, and everyone present seemed to understand that whatever happened next would reveal something important about both men's character and values. The weight of the moment settled on Musk's shoulders like a heavy coat he had never worn before. Standing there with his phone still in his hand, he felt the eyes of dozens of strangers watching his every move and waiting to see how one of the world's most powerful men would handle being told no by a young soldier who probably earned less in a year than Musk made in an hour. The irony was not lost on him, and for the first time in a very long time, he found himself genuinely uncertain about what to do next. His first instinct was to argue or negotiate, as he had done countless times in boardrooms and business deals around the world. Every fiber of his entrepreneurial spirit wanted to find a way around this obstacle, to convince the guard that a simple smile would not compromise his duties or diminish his professionalism. But something about the soldier's steady breathing and unwavering posture suggested that no amount of reasoning or persuasion would change the outcome of this encounter. The crowd around him seemed to sense his internal struggle. Some tourists looked disappointed that the confrontation was not escalating into something more dramatic, while others appeared genuinely curious to see whether the famous billionaire would accept defeat gracefully or make the situation worse by pushing harder. A few people in the back began to wander away, losing interest now that it seemed clear no major drama would unfold. Musk glanced at his security team and saw concern in their faces. They were trained to protect him from physical threats and manage crowd control, but this situation required a different kind of expertise. The guard represented legitimate authority backed by centuries of tradition and the full power of the British government. Any attempt to challenge that authority directly would create problems that extended far beyond a simple tourist photo opportunity. The silence stretched longer as Musk wrestled with his pride and his better judgment. Part of him wanted to make one more attempt to convince the guard, perhaps by explaining how much positive publicity the photo could generate for British tourism or how many people around the world would appreciate seeing a more human side of the famous palace guards. But a wiser part of his mind recognized that such arguments would only make him look more entitled and out of touch. The morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky, casting new shadows across the palace courtyard and highlighting the fine details of the guard's immaculate uniform. Every button gleamed, every crease was perfectly straight, and every element of his appearance reflected the pride and discipline of his military training. This was clearly someone who took enormous pride in his work and would not allow anyone to diminish the dignity of his position, regardless of their fame or wealth. A group of schoolchildren walked by with their teacher, chattering excitedly about the palace and pointing at the guards with wonder and respect. Their innocent enthusiasm reminded Musk of his own childhood fascination with space exploration and technology, when he had dreamed of achieving great things without fully understanding the responsibilities that would come with success. The guard was probably not much older than some of his own employees, yet he carried himself with a maturity and sense of purpose that commanded genuine respect. Musk realized that his request had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. He had approached the guard as if he were another piece of content to be captured and shared, rather than recognizing him as a professional performing an important duty. The soldier's rejection was not personal but institutional, designed to protect the dignity and integrity of an ancient tradition that existed long before social media and would continue long after current platforms became obsolete. The billionaire's phone felt heavier in his hand as he considered his options. He could put it away and walk away quietly, accepting the lesson in humility that the universe seemed determined to teach him. Or he could try to salvage something positive from the situation by finding a different approach that respected both his desire for interesting content and the guard's professional boundaries. The choice would say something important about his character and values. Other tourists continued to take photos of both men, capturing this unexpected moment of tension between old-world formality and new-world casualness. Some would undoubtedly post their images and videos online within minutes, adding their own commentary about celebrity entitlement or military professionalism. The story would take on a life of its own, regardless of how Musk chose to handle the immediate situation. The guard's breathing remained perfectly controlled, his posture unchanged despite the extended confrontation. He had clearly been trained to handle much more difficult situations than an overeager tourist with a camera, and nothing about Musk's presence or status seemed to affect his professional composure. This was someone who understood that his duty extended beyond his personal comfort or convenience, a concept that resonated with Musk's own commitment to his companies and their missions. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees lining the palace grounds, carrying with it the mixed sounds of London traffic and tourist conversations in multiple languages. The city continued its normal rhythm around them, indifferent to the small drama playing out between two individuals from very different worlds. Life would go on regardless of whether this moment ended in mutual respect or continued awkwardness. Musk found himself thinking about his own employees and how they might view this situation if they were watching. Many of them worked incredibly long hours and made significant personal sacrifices in service of their shared goals, whether those involved getting humans to Mars or accelerating the transition to sustainable energy. They deserve the same kind of respect for their dedication that this guard was demanding for his own service. Realization began to shift something fundamental in Musk's perspective. Instead of seeing the guard as an obstacle to overcome or a problem to solve, he started to appreciate him as a fellow professional who took his responsibilities seriously. Both men were committed to serving purposes larger than themselves, even though their methods and contexts were completely different. Perhaps there was something to be learned from this encounter rather than simply endured. His security team continued to monitor the situation carefully, ready to intervene if necessary, but hoping their client would handle things appropriately without their assistance. They had seen him navigate much more complex and hostile situations with grace and intelligence, so they remained confident that he would eventually find the right response to this unexpected challenge to his usual approach to public interactions. The crowd began to thin slightly as some tourists moved on to other attractions, but a core group remained to see how the standoff would resolve. Many were now taking photos of Musk rather than the guard, recognizing that his reaction might be more newsworthy than the soldier's professional behavior. The entire scene had taken on the quality of an impromptu theater performance with an uncertain ending. As the moment stretched toward its conclusion, Musk realized that whatever he said or did next would be remembered and shared far beyond this single encounter. The guard had already won the confrontation simply by maintaining his dignity and professional standards. The only question now was whether Musk could match that level of class in his response. A slow smile spread across Musk's face, but this time it was not the confident grin of someone expecting to get his way. Instead, it was the genuine expression of someone who had just learned something valuable about respect and dignity. He lowered his phone completely and took a small step back from the palace railings, creating more space between himself and the guard who had just delivered one of the most important lessons of his adult life. The change in Musk's demeanor was immediate and visible to everyone watching. His shoulders relaxed, his posture became less aggressive, and his entire body language shifted from demanding to respectful. The tourists around him sensed the transformation and began to murmur approvingly, recognizing that they were witnessing something rare and meaningful. Some even lowered their own phones, feeling that continuing to record might somehow diminish the sincerity of the moment. Musk looked directly at the guard and spoke in a voice that carried genuine appreciation rather than frustrated entitlement. His words were simple but heartfelt, acknowledging that he had overstepped boundaries and expressing real admiration for the soldier's unwavering commitment to his duties. The apology was not the calculated response of a public relations expert trying to manage a difficult situation, but the authentic reaction of someone who had genuinely learned from an unexpected encounter. The guard's response was minimal, but meaningful. He gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement, barely perceptible to anyone not watching carefully, but enough to indicate that the apology had been received and accepted. His posture remained perfect, and his eyes continued to stare straight ahead, but there was something in his bearing that suggested the tension had been resolved satisfactorily. The professional standards had been maintained while human dignity had been preserved on both sides. The crowd began to disperse, naturally, as people realized that the drama had reached its conclusion. Some tourists seemed disappointed that there had been no shouting match or dramatic confrontation, while others appeared genuinely moved by the respectful way both men had handled a potentially explosive situation. Children tugged at their parents' hands, eager to continue exploring the palace grounds, while adults lingered to discuss what they had just witnessed. Musk pulled out his phone again, but this time his approach was completely different. Instead of trying to photograph the guard or create content featuring another person without permission, he aimed his camera at the magnificent palace itself. The ancient stones and ornate architecture told their own story of tradition and continuity that needed no human subjects to make it interesting or meaningful. The building had witnessed centuries of history and would continue to stand long after current celebrities were forgotten. As he composed the shot of the palace gates and the impressive facade beyond, Musk found himself thinking about the nature of service and dedication. The guard standing nearby had chosen to dedicate years of his life to protecting traditions and institutions that were much larger than any individual. There was something both humbling and inspiring about that level of commitment to duty over personal recognition or comfort. The photo he took was simple but powerful, capturing the majesty of the palace without exploiting any of the people who worked there or visited as tourists. When he later posted it on his social media accounts, the image would speak for itself without requiring any human drama or controversy to make it engaging. Sometimes the most meaningful content came from showing respect rather than seeking attention. His security team visibly relaxed as they realized the situation had been resolved peacefully. They had been prepared for various scenarios, but the outcome they had witnessed was perhaps the best possible result for everyone involved. Their client had learned something valuable while avoiding any serious diplomatic or legal complications that could have resulted from a more aggressive approach to the situation. Other tourists began approaching Musk for photos and autographs, recognizing him now that the confrontation with the guard had ended. He was gracious and friendly with each person, taking time to chat with families and pose for pictures with visitors from around the world. But he was careful to ensure that none of these interactions interfered with the guards or other palace staff who were simply trying to do their jobs. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, warming the air and bringing out more details in the ancient stonework of the palace walls. The light seemed softer now, less harsh than it had been during the tense moments of the confrontation. Even the sounds of London traffic seemed more distant and less intrusive, as if the city itself had settled into a more peaceful rhythm. As Musk prepared to leave the palace area, he took one last look at the guard who had taught him such an important lesson. The young soldier remained at his post, unchanged by the brief encounter, but somehow more impressive for his unwavering professionalism. He represented something valuable that existed beyond fame or wealth or social media influence, something that deserved respect rather than exploitation. The walk back to his car gave Musk time to reflect on what had just happened and what it meant for his understanding of leadership and authority. He had built his career on disrupting established systems and challenging traditional ways of doing things. But this encounter had shown him that some traditions existed for important reasons and deserved to be preserved rather than changed. Phone buzzed with notifications as word of the encounter began to spread on social media. Other people who had witnessed the scene were already sharing their own photos and videos, adding their commentary about celebrity behavior and military professionalism. The story was taking on a life of its own, as internet stories often did, but Musk felt confident that his own response had been appropriate and respectful. Later that evening, sitting in his London hotel room, Musk composed a tweet that would become one of his most shared and appreciated posts. The message was simple and genuine, acknowledging what he had learned from the encounter and expressing genuine admiration for the dedication of the palace guards. He included the photo he had taken of the palace itself, letting the architecture speak for the majesty and history of the institution. The response to his tweet was overwhelmingly positive, with people from around the world sharing their own stories of respect for military service and traditional institutions. Many commented on how refreshing it was to see a powerful person admit when they had been wrong and show genuine appreciation for others who served in different capacities. The post generated millions of views and thousands of respectful comments. Encounter at Buckingham Palace became a turning point in Musk's understanding of his own influence and responsibilities. He realized that his massive social media following gave him the power to either exploit situations for entertainment, value, or use his platform to promote respect and understanding between different groups of people. The choice was always his to make, and this experience had shown him the value of choosing respect over spectacle. In the months that followed, Musk would often think back to the young guard who had stood his ground with such quiet dignity. The soldier had probably never heard of Tesla or SpaceX, and certainly had not been impressed by celebrity status or social media followers. Instead, he had simply done his job with professionalism and integrity, providing a valuable reminder that true authority comes from service rather than fame.